Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I'm so excited today to have Rich Honiball, who is the EVP and the Global Chief Merchandising and Marketing Officer for the Navy Exchange Service Command, which is also known as NEXCOM. Welcome, Rich.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me to come on.
Absolutely. So I wonder if you could start by explaining to us exactly what Navy Exchange Service Command is and what NEXCOM is as an organization, and then we'll get into your role a little bit more.
Sure. And it's actually, I'll try and do the short version of it because whenever you tell somebody that you do merchandising and marketing within an actual United States Navy command, it can throw folks off. So we are a United States Navy command, and we handle retail, hospitality, food, services, fuel, any of the things that you would think of that would be needed on a base anywhere around the world. We are roughly about a $3 billion revenue. I say business, but we are a command because we don't actually generate a profit. We generate profitable revenue, and it goes to support the morale, welfare, and recreation and quality of life of our patrons. We are here to offer quality goods, services, stays, and a shopping experience in a tax-free setting for active duty military, retired military, and their families anywhere around the world. We've been around officially since 1946.
Wow.
And before that, in a more informal way, from the late 1800s, when the first canteen opened up on a U.S. Navy ship.
Wow. So the combination of hotel-like, retail-like, restaurant-like, I mean, basically any of those services that a naval family would want to consume on any kind of a base, then that's what your focus is within the Navy, right?
Within there, yes. And then we also, so the Navy Exchange, which is the retail food, the Navy, which has retail, food, fuel, and services, is the biggest part. NEXCOM Hospitality Group has about 18,000 rooms, but we also help manage the uniform program, our ship stores, and a couple of other lines as well. So pretty complex organization,
Yeah.
but one that is extraordinarily rewarding.
Cool. So tell me about your role and maybe even about your team. Like, who are the folks that are focused on both the merchandising and the marketing aspects of NEXCOM?
So I hold I'll say two not unique positions, but two different positions. So I'm the chief merchandising officer for the retail portion of the Navy Exchange, which is about 1.7 billion. We have stores that range from 200 square feet to 200,000 square feet, and we literally carry almost every product and brand you can think of. And the teams are just like you would expect at an average retailer: buying, planning, financial, analytics, e-commerce, system support, etc. And then I'm the chief marketing officer for the command. So that includes not just Navy Exchange retail, but food, fuel, and services, and the hospitality group, as well as our internal and external branding. And so those teams, again, they'll operate like a traditional marketing department where they're planning promotions, planning creative, our digital connection, loyalty, et cetera. So the way I would say it is 90% of the time, if you came here, you would think we are like every other retailer, except I would put us a cut above because of who we serve. But 5 to 10% of the time, we are reminded that we are a Navy command and we have to go into action a little bit differently because we're also part of ensuring that individuals and families and commands are at the peak of readiness. So that's where we really make another difference.
Wow. And so how big-ish is the team in terms of the teams that are the different teams that you just described, like in terms of people?
So global associates, we have about 13,000 around the world who support all the various businesses. I think almost half of whom have some direct or indirect military connection.
Mm.
My team is about 400. And again, that's the merchandising and marketing arms, and various disciplines underneath that.
That makes sense. And I know you have a retail background. I know you spent, several years at JCPenney and years at Hager Clothing and a couple other places. So I'm curious about your career path, but it is fascinating to me to think that, I mean, you're essentially operating a massive retailer. So your structure and team probably mirrors what any retailer of that size would look like in terms of people and to your point, departments and, and specialties and all of that.
Yeah, what I would say is similar. I would say that our teams are a little bit more streamlined because we have to cover so many different areas of the business.
Mhm.
So one of our buyers or one of our planners will cover a much wider range of categories than the typical buyer that you might find in an outside retailer. So in that respect, we're a little bit different. We also have local buyers in areas like Pearl Harbor, in Europe, and in Japan, because we look to procure local goods either out of necessity or for those families that go and are looking for gifts. So
Hmm.
it's a but typically it is a fairly similar structure, just very lean, and we have to adapt, improvise, and overcome quite a bit.
So I think you got your undergraduate degree from Southern New Hampshire University and then got an MBA from William and Mary,
Yes.
and then embarked on your career. And that included a bunch of stops, like I mentioned, retailers. I saw Brooks Brothers in there and several others. So tell me about the path that led you to this role.
So I'll give you the irony that not a lot of people know. So out of my original intent, my plan A was to go to college on an ROTC scholarship and join the Navy, be a career naval
Hmm.
officer, JAG Corps. Afterwards, maybe private practice, dabble in politics, had the whole thing mapped out. Unfortunately, a prior injury rendered Plan A inoperable, and over time, this became Plan B. What's because it was Plan B, and oftentimes people that wind up in certain careers, they're accidental, and that happens a lot in retail. I spent several years trying to decide what it was I wanted to be when I grew up, and thankfully I had a couple of mentors who were able to show me the value of really connecting with consumers at various levels, and sparked a passion in me and a desire to really learn more about customers and how to take care of them. And so my journey's taken me from store operations to buying to product development to design to brand building, working in luxury and moderate, specialty and department store, retail and wholesale, and working marketing and e-commerce, all with having that tether point to the consumer. And then 9 years ago, when I joined NEXCOM after a several month long conversation and really meeting my current boss, retired Admiral Bianchi, and just being really tugged on by the mission here, it's come full circle. I finally had the chance to join the Navy.
Right, right.
I hold the civilian equivalent position of a flag officer. Not that when you look at it, when you have a real flag officer, it's not the same thing, but it is kind of cool at cocktail parties. But we serve an amazing customer that needs everything that we do, and so to come full circle and to wind up here 30 years later, it's an interesting journey and one I wouldn't trade for anything.
That's really cool. Well, yeah, it's like you got your childhood wish, not childhood, but your wish of being part of
Yes.
the Navy and supporting obviously the Navy sailors and families, in ways that I always talk about the passion for marketing is it helps us know about and the things that we both want and need, and we wouldn't know about those things otherwise, and you're providing those things that all of these sailors and families want and need, and preparing them to help defend our country and all of the other things that the Navy does for us. So that's awesome. It's pretty cool to be able to pair your lifelong experience with something that's super important.
It's a good feeling. I mean, what we do pales in comparison to what they do, but to be able to contribute in some way, it's fulfilling.
Yeah. So I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that either you wish you'd gotten earlier in your career, or maybe one you would give to a young person that's just starting out in a marketing career.
So I would say that there's two pieces of advice that I lean on. One that I struggle with. The first one is the mistakes that you make early on in your career. I think when you're in the moment, you feel the weight of it on your shoulder. You feel all eyes upon you, and so often I find myself saying, "Look, this is going to blow over." In most cases, 99% of the cases, no one's going to remember this. But I'm a founding member of the Imposter Syndrome Club, so
Mhm.
I think to a certain extent, having that I'm willing to fail, but I always want to strive to be better. And having that little bit of insecurity, I think, has helped drive me. So I think there's that balance there, right? I think the thing I've been leaning on more lately is I mentioned that my career is kind of an accidental one. I didn't go to school, say I want to be a CMO and go through the different ladders, the different levels. And so typically if I'm coaching somebody at the early stage of their career, my advice is to take the first several years and focus less on title and money and more on what you're going to learn, who you're going to learn from, what you're going to be exposed to. You'll have time to make money. You'll have time
Yeah.
to get the title. But being able to see the world or see different avenues of the business or gaining different perspectives is tremendously valuable as you go through.
Absolutely. I love that advice. So I believe everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what your superpower is. I don't think Mr. Imposter Syndrome is a superpower. There's something else there.
Well, no, but I will tell you, and this, I think I discovered a little bit more. I have a daughter who goes to George Mason, and I've learned a lot about myself through her. And I would say my superpower is probably empathy.
Mm,
And I say that because if you go to, I don't want to go nerd with superheroes, but oftentimes a superpower is also an albatross. It's also
right.
your greatest
Right.
weakness, and empathy is one of those that it can weigh you down. It can cause you to hesitate to make tough decisions that you have to make. Um, but if you manage it right, I think empathy can be a superpower. And I think I've learned to manage it over time and use it to I won't say use it to my advantage, but to use it as hopefully something that's good.
Great. Well, I think as marketers, that's one of the very important attributes for good marketers because we really need to put ourselves in the shoes and understand the consumer that we're trying to serve. And empathy is a really valuable attribute for that. So that is definitely a great superpower for any marketer. I'm curious if there's some specific values that you want to demonstrate as a leader, or maybe there are values that you would demand of anybody that would be on your team.
So as a leader, the way I think I'm migrating is I'm trying to get to a point where when I come in to a certain organization, there's different needs that the organization may have, and I think my role 9 years ago was to challenge the status quo, be a disruptor, try to be a voice of innovation in a government bureaucratic environment. I've got to tell you, I've got a phenomenal team now, and I find that now what I've pivoted to is trying to be a better listener, a better coach, a better support structure, and stand next to someone when something goes wrong, and have them feel like I've got them no matter what. And I think that evolves both as you develop as a leader, and then also in the situation that you find yourself in. As far as what I look for in other people, I I think even just a couple of years ago, I don't know that I could have answered that as emphatically as I answer it now. The one thing that I will absolutely look for in people is curiosity. I think if you can be the smartest person, you can be digitally savvy, you can be analytical, you can be creative. If you're not curious, we're probably going to struggle, because I want
Mhm.
someone who, you could teach a lot of skill sets, but that natural curiosity I think is important. And then the counter to that is I believe that one of the biggest challenges in marketing is bias, and in many different forms. Probably one of the toughest ones as you move up within the chain of command is confirmation bias, and surrounding yourself with people that mistakenly believe that you just want to hear your own voice or your own ideas repeated back to you. And so I look for people that can help challenge what I'm saying and what I'm thinking. And those are the teammates that I tend to respect the most and
Hmm,
value the most.
I like that. So at Setup, we're marketing matchmakers and we connect brands and marketing agencies together. And so we're not a brand, we're not an agency. We kind of live in that space in between. And that gives us a unique perspective on specifically that agency client relationship, but to both groups. I'm curious, either at NEXCOM or even in a previous role, how do you work with marketing agencies?
It's a good question, and I guess I'll start by throwing myself under the bus a little bit. When I was more in the apparel and the design side, when I was on the product development and sourcing side, actually, I and I'll say this in air quotes, I wasn't a huge fan of designers. I thought, well, they're just kind of out there, and I learned to really love and appreciate design and creativity. And so as my career moved more into marketing, I really have fallen in love with the creative thought process. With that, when I was first stepping into marketing roles, it was in the more traditional agency of record. You have that one large agency that comes to you with two or three big ideas for a campaign, and then they outsource the rest of it. And the reason that I reference the apparel design is I think that that exchange between internal and external resources, internal and external talent, if you show a favoritism to one over the other, I think it can diminish the value of your ideas and your progress. So typically what I look for is what I kind of call a daisy chain, is where are three or four smaller agencies that have a skill set in content or digital or storytelling or creative, and how, I don't want to use the word integrate because we don't integrate, but how do they connect in to our teams so that the outside agency is getting a true understanding as to who we are and what our mission is, and the internal team doesn't feel like, hey, they're only listening to them, because they're from the outside,
Right.
and I could do that if they would just let me have time. And it doesn't always work, but when it works well, it really sparks great ideas, great creativity. And so that's what we strive for.
Mm. So I'm curious if there are certain functions of marketing that you feel need to be held within the organization because they're core to what, something that's important to you. And there are certain other disciplines or aspects of marketing that you really like to get an outside perspective because maybe they're not in the weeds as much, or maybe they bring some skill that you don't want to hire for or something like that.
I think when I've worked with other companies and seen kind of different skill sets and what truly is available to them and where they have to augment it, I felt differently. I would develop a matrix of, this is what you should do internally, this is what you should outsource or partner with. I think here it's more situational. I
Mm,
think one of the common threads that we have within the entire team is whether somebody is served in the military or is connected to someone who has, or just learns to have a true admiration for the patron. They want that passion to come through. So to me, it's more of an evolution. There's times where I might want to lean in and get more creative support because I feel like we need some fresh ideas and we have more going on. And then there's other times where we may want to stretch ourselves digitally and we need that outside support. So the way we try to set up our network is to be able to kind of ebb and flow the way that the needs ebb and flow. But that means that there isn't necessarily one area where I would say, hey, look, I don't want to do it in house, or an area that I would say that I absolutely don't want to look out of house. So a little bit more flexible, a little more
yeah.
agile.
Well, and I like that the answer about it's situational, like, and it's also probably changes over time as your team changes, as your needs change, then you may pivot and say, we used to do that in-house, but now we need somebody external to work on that, or vice versa.
Yeah, and it's one of those, a lot of people will talk about agile thought process, and when you start to, and I believe in process, but the more formulaic you make it, the less agile just by nature you're becoming. So it really tends to be somewhat situational.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is the case with the NEXCOM or maybe in a previous role, but often as marketers, we're working with the non-marketing functions of the organization who sometimes believe that they're they're amateurs, but they believe they're professionals. I'm curious, if how do you demonstrate the value of marketing to the non-marketing functions within an organization?
So I'll give you I'm going to give you a kind of a two-part answer. In my current organization, I'm very fortunate that I report to a CEO who's a retired admiral, served for 31 years, and has continued serving in this role for 10. And he is as connected to the sailor as anybody who I've ever met. And great marketing can connect communities. It can
Hmm.
engage people at an emotional level. And so beyond the acquisition metrics or the attachment metrics and all the things that I would use in other worlds and that we still track here, he very much understands, and our team very much understands the added value of marketing. So he gets it, and he loves it, and he'll be the first to recognize it.
Hmm.
Now, if I go outside of that, I've worked for other companies that will feel differently. I was working with a private equity company that put together a particular campaign, phenomenally creative, achieved the objectives, hit the metrics, and felt that it was successful. And we did measure it. We were able to measure it by the age of the consumer, by the number of new customers, by acquisition. But the learning that I had from that is that there were certain portions of the leadership and the ownership team that didn't understand what we were doing.
Hmm.
And I think my learning from that is not investing the time in getting them more on board and finding out, yes, these are the metrics that I'm used to and that I think are valuable, but how can I tell the story in a way that it hits the metrics that you're looking for? You're not always going to be successful with it, but ultimately we were challenged with that campaign because some key people just didn't see the value in it, as good as it was and as well as I thought it performed. And so I would say kind of the lesson from that, both internally and externally, is know the different stakeholders. And much like consumers, they don't react to the same message, to the same channel. You have to find the way to tell the message different depending on your audience, as long as it stays true to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yep. I'm curious, either at NextCom or maybe in a previous role, if there's a specific campaign or program that you've run that either it taught you something because it was a flop and you needed to learn a valuable lesson, or it was a huge success and it's something that you might want to emulate again in the future.
So ironically, the campaign that I was kind of referring to at the private equity was one where it was successful, but ultimately the campaign didn't flop, but the ultimate judgment of it flopped because I hadn't connected the dots, and so that's a
Hmm.
lesson learned. I would say internally, there's a couple of campaigns that we've done very well with, and what I've learned from them, not a big fan of the word authenticity in marketing because I find it's one of those words that gets very much overused from a content perspective.
For sure.
But a couple, when we went into the pandemic and we were having to rethink everything, we do customer appreciation and engagement events, and we had all of these assets, all the we had plans to do things around the world, and that all of a sudden came shutting down. And within about 4 weeks, we said, not how do I leverage these assets that I've paid for? How do I monetize it? But how do we connect with our community and give them hope and do the right thing? And so we rethought in a virtual world, and we pulled together an Across the Waves campaign, where we had concerts and virtual barbecue competitions and 5Ks, and we tied it back to our product categories. The big takeaway was it wasn't motivated by profit. It was motivated by trying to do the right thing for the patron. And oh, by the way, as we started to execute it, we saw this tremendous response to it, and it helped sales. And we've had a
Hmm.
couple of examples like that. And I don't know that you can always do that as a marketer. And I'm famous for watching Super Bowl commercials and chastising some of the brands that try to show a sense of purpose that don't belong in that messaging. But when we truly start with the consumer and trying to solve a need, I think those are the campaigns that I've seen that do remarkably well. And so that's what we're inspired to do.
Hmm. By the way, I love that Across the Waves is so brilliant because obviously there's the literal, ocean going part of it, but then across the airwaves, across the internet waves, across sound waves. I mean, you could talk about all of the different ways that you probably thought about crossing waves, and such a great. I don't know if that was something that your team came up with
Actually,
or executed.
it was a combination of an outside agency and internal ideas and brainstorming, and the very direct part of it was, I have friends of mine who are in the military who are deployed and away from their sons or daughters my kids' age for 6, 7, 8 months at a time. And so
Right.
how do you do events that connect the two of them, even though they're across the waves? But yeah, we now have an events campaign. It's called Waves of Gratitude, and
Hmm.
so it's something that's it's continued to blossom, and we love it.
That's great. All right, I'm going to switch gears and ask you a couple of just quick hitting questions just for
Sure.
fun that aren't necessarily marketing related. So the first is, I'm curious if there's a quote or a book or a movie or a band or a sports team or anything like that that really inspires you, and what is it about that thing that inspires you most?
So I'll say there's different things at different times. There's a quote that I have on my LinkedIn page that's the challenge everything. There's a quote that I will always use with my daughter, and she'll attribute it to me. I don't know where it came from, but there's always a solution. But the one that sticks out to me is Grace Hopper was a admiral in the Navy. And if you Google her, very, very small woman, but a pioneer when it came to computing.
Hmm.
And she has a quote that I have in my office. It's a ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are meant for. So set sail to sea and do new things. And that first part has been attributed to several people, but obviously the attachment to the Navy means something, but you've got to take risks. You've got to set sail. You've got to try things, and if it doesn't work, then figure it out and try again. And so that's something that we try to live by. And when you study her and her achievements, it really is an amazing thing.
Nice. Other than your family, which is an easy, answer,
It
where do
is.
you find joy outside of work? What things do you have, hobbies or things that you love to do?
Well, so it's interesting. I'm about to embark on a part-time teaching career. So interesting that I'm now an empty nester, and my wife has said I need a hobby, and so
Right.
I'm going to teach retail and e-commerce and consumer marketing. So I don't know that I'm stretching beyond what I do, but for it to really escape, it's travel. I've had the opportunity, both for business or pleasure, to travel to all 50 states. I think I'm up to about 64 countries. My wife and I
Wow.
are going to Istanbul and to Croatia next month. I'm 20 years ago, it was about, hey, I'm going to be in Delhi. Let's do the 5 hour train to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. Check. Now, as empty nesters, we're enjoying going to, Seville for 5 or 6 days and just taking it slow and really discovering it. And I will tell you, every trip I take, I feel energized, refreshed, inspired in one way or another. There isn't a place in the country, in the world that I've gone, that I haven't found something to love.
Yeah. Well, those are two, I would say the teaching is, empowering the next generation of marketing talent is give, also a way to give back as well. So that's admirable too. Okay, I'm curious if there's a brand that you've never worked on that you really admire, and what is it about that brand you admire?
There's several, but I think one that I would say comes to mind as we um, the reason I'm hesitating is we have over 2 or 3 thousand brands, and one of the things that I can't do is I have to be careful with mentioning a brand that we carry because it could be perceived
Sure,
as
right,
endorsement.
right. Good point.
But I will tell you, I think Dove's authenticity and what they've done with the brand. I'm a girl dad, and I
Yeah.
believe in, it's one of my challenges is to help shatter ceilings for some amazingly talented women. And I look at a Dove and what they do with their marketing campaign, and I think they live it. Uh, I Trader Joe's. I love Trader Joe's. They have the experience right, and what I love about them is they're unique, they're quirky, and they do everything that everyone says that shouldn't work right now.
Right,
We're
right,
going to
right.
do bricks and mortar, and we're not going to have an e-com site, and we're not going to deliver, and you're not going to drive up. And yet we go on a Saturday and it's 30, 40, 50 people deep.
Well, and we're going to intentionally make the parking lot too small so that it seems even busier than it is.
I guess it's that way where you are. It's my wife won't go with me on Saturdays because it's almost impossible.
But I love that you picked a retailer, as you should, pick a real retailer that you admire. And you're right about Trader Joe's too. They also have a pretty small footprint from a retail standpoint, typically, not as big as these giant big box grocery stores. And so they have to curate what they put in there very carefully. And I also a huge emphasis on store brand. I
Yes.
mean, Trader Joe's brand versus name brand. I mean, they carry some name brand, but a lot of it is Trader Joe's brand, which means that the margin's probably better for them than it would be if they were focused on just name brand.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think they get it right, and it's a fun shopping experience, and that's sometimes what you need.
yeah, I love it. All right. Well, Rich Honiball, again, this EVP and Global Chief Merchandising and Marketing Officer for NEXCOM. Thank you so much, Rich. This was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the invitation.